Coming up on Locked On Dodgers, it was a weird weekend at Dodger Stadium as Dodger fans gave a standing ovation to an opponent who was kicking the crap out of them, but it wasn't just any opponent. It was Albert Pujols. It was Albert Pujols' weekend at Dodger Stadium. We're going to talk about Pujols and his accomplishment. We're going to talk about some Dodgers news about the pitching staff with Dustin May, Tyler Anderson, Blake Treinen, and others. We're going to talk about the Dodgers becoming the first team ever to do something that involves winning a lot of games. We're going to give an update on Cody, Bellinger, Chris Taylor, and we're going to answer a listener question about an earned run that Julio gave up a couple nights ago and why it was earned. So, a lot to get to, so let's get Locked On Dodgers.
You are Locked On Dodgers, your daily Los Angeles Dodgers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, Dodger fans. This is Locked On Dodgers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every day. Remember, this show is free and available on all podcast platforms and on YouTube simply by searching for Locked On Dodgers. Or even better, go ahead and just subscribe wherever you're watching or listening right now, and then you will never miss a day because you know we're not going to. If this is your first time watching or listening, my name is Jeff Snider. My usual co-host is Vince Samperio, but it's just me today. Vince and I are both lifelong Dodger fans just like you are. We've also both spent time covering the Dodgers in the press box and the locker room. So we're not quite insiders, but we bring you the smart fans' perspective on our boys in blue every weekday morning. I want to thank Vince for holding down the fort on Friday. I was at a baseball tournament with my son and didn't have internet access sufficient to try to record a podcast, so I appreciate Vince holding down the fort in that night. A lot to talk about. I mentioned Albert Pujols. He was the story of this weekend, and thankfully, he was only really the story of Friday, and that's good. You know, I said on this podcast, I said on the radio, my ideal version of the weekend would be for Pujols to get to 700 home runs at Dodger Stadium this weekend in a losing cause, and for the Dodgers to win all three games. That's not what happened, but we got the next best thing. He got them both out of the way on Friday. The Dodgers lost that game, and then they won the last two games. So they win the series. They win the season series with the Cardinals. All in all, it's the best case scenario. If you know Albert Pujols is going to hit 2 home runs, drive in 5 runs, and you're going to lose that game, okay, let's do that on Friday. Get it out of the way. Because it would have been, I don't know what the word is, not annoying, not terrible, but you know, to have to root for Pujols to homer all weekend long, one night was enough. And I'm never going to root for the Dodgers to lose. If Pujols had come up in a tie game in the 9th inning, I would have been rooting for a strikeout. You know, I am not going to root for the Dodgers to lose ever. But I can get on board with being happy about a guy like Albert Pujols hitting a milestone home run. And, you know, I watched that game from a hotel room on my iPad, and I was happy. You know, I was bummed. I was mostly bummed that Andrew Heaney put guys on base, so both of the home runs came with runners on base. I would have much rather had those be 2 solo home runs instead of 5 runs between the two, because that put the Dodgers in a big old hole. But I was happy for Albert. Albert was one of my favorite players, you know, from when he first came up. I loved Albert Pujols. And the last decade or so, I've been more just focusing on the Dodgers. I've always been a Dodger fan first and foremost, but I don't have enough time, you know, with wife and kids. I don't have enough time to pay close attention to all of baseball anymore like I did when I was in college and when even when I was young, married, and only had one kid. You know, you can spend more time on baseball, but with how much time the Dodgers occupy of my life these days, you know, with writing about them for a living and talking about them for a living, I don't have as much time to pay attention to the rest of the league. And Pujols, you know, he wasn't on good teams. He wasn't good himself. So I never stopped liking Albert Pujols. I just stopped thinking about him as much until last year when he came back to the Dodgers, and I remembered everything that I loved about Pujols because it wasn't always just, he's a legitimate first ballot Hall of Famer. He's one of the best hitters of our generation, and that was one of the things I liked about him. But I just liked the dude. You know, he's a likable guy, and I saw that last year. You know, he's a very likable guy, and you know, he said he was happy to hit this milestone homer at Dodger Stadium where he refound his joy for the game, which, you know, he didn't say Artie Moreno's name, but we know what he's talking about. You know, Albert Pujols was miserable for years. And last year he came to the Dodgers, learned how to have fun again, is having fun this year with the Cardinals having his best season since the last time he played for the Cardinals. It's been outstanding. And so, yeah, I'm really, really happy that Albert Pujols got to 700 home runs, and I'm happy he did it against the Dodgers even. I wish the Dodgers had won the game, but, beyond that. And Phil Bickford, who gave up the game or the record, the milestone home run, that's what I'm looking for. He had kind of said the same thing. He said, at first I was upset that I gave up the home run. When the crowd reacted, seeing all the smiles, it was a very special moment for MLB. And Albert Pujols is also one of the most amazing people I've ever met. After I got over being upset at giving up the home run, toward the very end of it, it was obviously a special moment. Bickford was teammates with Pujols last year. Bickford's probably been the recipient of a T.O. hug. Andrew Heaney was teammates with Pujols for several years on the Angels. Those guys both know Albert, and there's part of me, I don't know if it's a conspiracy theory, if I actually believe it, or somewhere in between, but after Heaney gave up the first homer to Pujols, and it was clear from his pitch count and everything that he wasn't going to be in the game for very long, I wonder if Dave Roberts went with Phil Bickford next, just as kind of the reliever who's most likely to give up a home run, I guess, and the reliever who's least likely to be on the postseason roster, so no harm done. It's like, hey, Phil, go give up a home run, a really meaningful home run. I don't know how it was. Dave Roberts, it was hard to tell from his reaction whether he was upset or happy about the home run. Afterwards, he said all the right things. He's definitely happy. Everybody agrees. They're happy for Albert Pujols. It sucked to lose that game 11-0, but the Dodgers came back and won the other two games in the series, and that's a big deal. The 11-0 game, it was weird. The Pujols second home run put them down 5-0, and after that, it was just kind of, okay, throw in the towel. This is Albert Pujols' night. Let's move on. And they did move on, and they won on Saturday and they won on Sunday. Scored 10 runs, allowed 3 runs in those 2 games. Really, really good bounce back to win the series. And that's all you can really ask for. And with that, the Dodgers clinched the division, or clinched the best record in the National League. So they will have home field advantage for the NLDS and the NLCS, assuming they get to the NLCS. They still haven't locked up home field advantage for the World Series, but they're very, very close. They have a 5.5 game lead and 9 games to play. And so they're going to have home field advantage for the World Series too. If they get there, it's just a matter of locking that up. Dodgers have now won 106 games, and that is pretty darn impressive. I'm going to come back in a minute. I'm going to talk about just how impressive that is, kind of put some historical context on those 106 wins and what they've done the last few years. So thank you for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every weekday morning, and please keep it Locked On Dodgers. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. It's so easy to create a job listing on LinkedIn Jobs, and the job seekers are already on LinkedIn, so it's great. And after you create your listing, add your job and the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience, so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. We're coming to the end of the year, and the right team member might help you finish off strong. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonmlb. That's linkedin.com/lockedonmlb to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, I am back. I want to thank you again for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every weekday morning. It really does mean a lot to Vince and me that you guys spend your time here with us. We love talking about the Dodgers, and we hope you enjoy listening to us. As I mentioned, the Dodgers won their 106th game of the season on Sunday. It's their 3rd time in the last 4 years that they've won 106 games. The one time they didn't, they only played 60 games, so it would have been mathematically impossible for them to win 106. Hashtag math. But so 2019, 2021, and 2022, they had 106 wins in each of those seasons. They're going to hopefully end up with more than 106 this year. And the funny thing is, in 2020, the one year they didn't win 106 games, they went 43-17. That's a 116 win pace over the course of a full season. And, it's easy to say, But, obviously they wouldn't keep that up for the full time. You can't say they would 116. And I get that and I agree. But I thought I'd look and see what were their records at the 60 game mark in each of these 3 seasons that they got to 106. In 2019, after 60 games, there were 41-19. So 2 games worse than they were in 2020. In 2021, they were 35-25. That's 8 games worse. And then this year they were 37-23, 6 games worse than they were in 2020 at the 60 game mark. So yeah, realistically, over the last 4 years, no team has ever done what the Dodgers have done over the last 4 years, and really over the last 6 years. They had that weird year in 2018 where they finished with a lot fewer wins than you would have expected based on their performance. They turned it on at the right time. They got to the World Series. 2017, they won 104 games, and that was even with losing 16 out of 17 late in the season. That was another great team. And this is like, I know it's popular to poo-poo on Dave Roberts, but a lot of teams have put together talented rosters over the years, and no team has ever done what these Dodgers have done the last few years, ever. And so, people say, well, a junior college manager could win with this team, and it's just not true. Dave Roberts is a solid manager as far as managing goes. He is easily the best manager in baseball as far as managing people, and he's pretty good at most of the other things. 2019 is frustrating, because they did, you can make a good case that he cost the Dodgers that division series. Other than that, though, and I know there's people quibble with taking Rich Hill out in 2018, taking Rich Hill out in 2017, and the fact is, I disagree with most of those, or at least I recognize why Dave Roberts made the moves he made. There's really only been a couple that I think you can really say he made the wrong move. And I definitely think Clayton Kershaw coming out for the 8th inning in Game 5 of the NLDS in 2019 was one of those. But, most of the time it's, we're looking at, I actually heard Andrew Friedman refer to these as 55-45 decisions the other day. And I'm not surprised you use that terminology. I know I didn't invent it, but that's how I've always talked about it. And I hadn't heard Andrew Friedman talk about that before. But, you got a decision where option A gives you a 55% chance of success. Option B gives you 45%. And the thing about those is, even if you pick the quote unquote right answer, 45% of the time, it's not going to work out right. And that's why it's so easy to second guess a manager. But the way to really look at a manager's success is, well, does he have the best winning percentage in managerial history? Did his team just set a record for the most wins over a 4-season stretch? Yes and yes. Okay, Dave Roberts must be at least an adequate manager. I'll put it that way. This Dodgers team is spectacular, and they've been awesome. And when we look at what's going to happen the rest of the way, the Dodgers have clinched a bye through the first round of the postseason. They're in the NLDS. They have home field advantage. The home field advantage probably throughout the postseason as long as they go. There is nothing I want more in a baseball standpoint than for the Dodgers to be the team smiling sometime between November 1st and November 5th when the last game of the postseason is done playing. I want the Dodgers to win the World Series. It's what I want more than anything from a baseball standpoint. But if they don't, that won't undo how much fun I've had this year. I've spent a lot of time. I've watched almost every minute of Dodgers baseball that has been played this year. There was one, they had a doubleheader against the Cubs, I think, that Clayton Kershaw pitched the first game of the doubleheader, and my son had baseball games that I was coaching that day, and so I didn't see any of that game that Kershaw pitched. And then there was one other game that I only saw an inning or two of. I think I've seen every other minute of Dodger baseball this year, and I love it. And I write about Dodger baseball for a living. I talk about it for a living. It's, I joke that baseball is the most important, unimportant thing in the world. Well, now that it's also my livelihood, it's also pretty important too. I love Dodger baseball. I love watching it. I love being a part of it. And if the Dodgers don't win the World Series, that won't change how much fun I've had over the last 6 months. Hopefully we have another month or more of fun coming up. And, even in 2019, we talked about that game was devastating. Game 5 of the NLDS. If you were listening to this podcast back then, I cried on this podcast that night recording, talking about the Dodgers losing that game that they should have won. It was sad. It was frustrating. It was heartbreaking. I care a lot. But that didn't undo the fun that I had the rest of 2019. 2019 at all those walk-offs. You had the walk-off weekend against the Rockies. There was so much fun that year. I still look back on it with so much fondness. Yeah, the fact that they lost in the NLDS, it kind of changes the way we look back at it, but it doesn't take it away. And that'll be the same thing this year. If the Dodgers don't win the World Series, that won't change how much fun it's been to watch Mookie Betts and Freddie Freeman and Trey Turner and Will Smith and Clayton Kershaw and Julio Urias and Tony Gonsolin and all the other stuff we've had this year. And I really do believe the Dodgers have a very good chance to win the World Series. I've said before on this podcast, and I really believe it. This is the kind of team that feels like you could look back 6 months from now and say, well, yeah, of course they were going to win the World Series. They were a lot better than everybody else. And I really do believe that. But the best team doesn't always win the World Series. The Major League Baseball postseason is not designed to reward the best team. Back in the day before division play, so before 1969, I think it was kind of designed to reward the best team because the winner of the National League played the winner of the American League in the World Series, and that was it. There was a max of 7 postseason games every year. The best team against the best team. Okay, which of these best teams is the best team? Well, now we've got literally 4 rounds of playoffs. We've got, 6 teams from each league making the postseason instead of 1. Like, you could do that math, right? 6 times 1, that's 6 times as many teams making the postseason as it used to be. I'm not saying it was better back then. I'm saying it's different. And now every team you add adds randomness to the equation because in baseball, even more than most other sports, any team can win on any given day. The postseason series, the nature of them, it changes the nature of the game a little bit because you got the days off. So you don't need 5 starters anymore. You only need 4. You can get away with 3 sometimes if you've got a workhorse. And so it's a different game. I still think the Dodgers are the best team and they'll be the best team under the October rules and they'll win the World Series. But the way baseball is designed, it's not designed for the best team to win the World Series, if that makes sense. A couple things we know about what will happen in the postseason this year. Blake Treinen, if he's healthy, he will be on the postseason roster. Dave Roberts said that this weekend. They still don't know if Treinen will pitch again in the regular season, but Roberts basically said that Treinen has nothing he needs to prove. If he's healthy, he's going to be on the postseason roster. If he's healthy is a very big if at this point, and then the follow-up question is how long will he be healthy? But if he's healthy, he's going to be on the roster. Another thing we know is that Tyler Anderson will be in the starting rotation. We kind of assumed that based on everything else that's been happening. We knew that Julio and Kershaw would be the top 2 starters. Anderson will be the 3rd starter in the postseason. And then that just leaves one more spot where you've got Tony Gonsolin, Andrew Heaney, and Dustin May. Well, Tony Gonsolin's been on the injured list for a month and a half. Dustin May this weekend also went on the injured list with a back issue that we don't really know what it is. Dave Roberts said the word oblique, but we don't know if he really meant it. We don't really know the nature of May's injury. We don't know when he'll be back. We know he won't be back in the regular season just because the rules of the injured list. He won't be back in the regular season. We're hoping that he will be ready for the postseason. And Andrew Heaney obviously gives up a lot of home runs. He's healthy as far as we know, but gives up a lot of home runs. But they could easily cobble together a 4th starter out of those 3 guys, even if it's 2 innings each or 3 innings. Excuse me. So we know a little bit more than we did. We also know a lot less than we did in some ways going into the weekend. I'm going to come back in a minute. I'm going to give a little update on Chris Taylor and Cody Bellinger, and I'm going to answer a listener question about Julio and an earned run that he allowed on Thursday and why it was earned and all of that. So thank you again for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every weekday morning, and please keep it Locked On Dodgers. All right, Dodger fans, I am back for one last segment. I want to thank you one more time for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every day. It really does mean a lot to Vince and me. We love talking Dodgers with you. I'm hoping my voice will hold out for this one. A little peek behind the curtain. I recorded this episode once already and then discovered that the audio did not record. So this is my second time, which means the good news is you're getting the better version because I already practiced all of this stuff. Sad part is this was the better version. Can you imagine how bad the first one was? Just kidding. I think this has been a pretty good episode so far. So let's talk about Cody Bellinger and Chris Taylor. As we've talked about on this show before, they're kind of the 2 big question marks going in. Last year, if the Dodgers had any better options, Bellinger and Taylor probably wouldn't have even made the roster, definitely wouldn't have been starting in the postseason because both of them were terrible leading up to the postseason. Bellinger was terrible basically the whole year. Taylor started well, made the All-Star team last year, but his last couple months were awful. And the Dodgers just didn't have better options. They had Steven Souza, they had Luke Raley, they had Billy McKinney. It's like they didn't have good options to replace those guys, and it worked out. Well, it didn't work out in the long run. The Dodgers didn't win the World Series, but we just talked about that. But Chris Taylor was their best hitter in the postseason. Cody Bellinger had some huge hits for them in the postseason, including the big hit that helped them beat the Giants in the NLDS. So the Dodgers got lucky that they didn't have better options last year. This year they have better options, or they have other options, guys who aren't Luke Raley and Billy McKinney. And as we go into the postseason, Bellinger and Taylor are going to have to earn their playing time. So let's talk about Chris Taylor. He actually had a pretty good stretch. Since he came back from the injured list in early August, he hasn't been good. He's been bad. But he actually had a good 9-game stretch from September 10th through 19th. He had a 907 OPS in that time. And, that coincided with him shaving his beard for the Sandlot costume for dress-up day. But we thought, oh, good, Chris Taylor might be finding it. Well, since then, in the last, week, he's 1 for 17. He has a 259 OPS. He has 7 strikeouts in that time. He's been really, really bad. And it's so hard to know what to expect with Chris Taylor. He's always been streaky, but, I don't know. He provides a lot of value defensively, and he will be on the roster. I think he and Bellinger are both locks for the roster no matter what happens. And when he gets playing time, maybe he will get hot again. That's the thing about guys who are streaky. Sometimes they get hot at the right time. Sometimes they get cold at the wrong time. So we don't know what to expect with Taylor, but that's kind of where he's at right now. Bellinger, in his last 7 games, he's 6 for 16. That's a 375 batting average. He's got 4 doubles, only 2 strikeouts in those 16 at-bats. Very, very good. But it's 7 games, and we've seen so much over the last few years of Cody Bellinger get our hopes up. Oh, he's fixed. Oh, it was temporary. That I'm definitely not going to get too excited over a 7-game stretch, but I am going to remain hopeful that he figured something out. And I think the Dodgers have the firepower to, bat him 9th, even if he's not hitting, bat him 9th, let the other guys hit. Maybe he'll run into one once in a while, and he'll provide good defense for you. Like at this point, because the Dodgers have so many other good hitters on the team, I'm thinking Bellinger is mostly your starter in the postseason. Definitely against right-handed pitching, but they do have Trace Thompson. They got Joey Gallo. They've got other options. It's just a matter of I think Bellinger. I don't know. I don't believe in superpowers for the postseason, especially a guy like Bellinger who, he's had huge hits the last couple of years in the postseason after not having good regular seasons, but Bellinger was also the opposite of that in 2017. He was maybe the worst hitter on the Dodgers in the 2017 World Series. And, after being great as a rookie. So I don't believe it's a superpower he can just turn on when it gets to fall, but I remain hopeful that he will figure it out and get hot at the right time. So that's kind of the update on those 2 guys. Obviously other guys are not as big a question marks. I think Freddie Freeman's going to make the roster. That seems pretty safe at this point. Last thing I want to talk about, I didn't get to, like I said, I wasn't here for the episode on Friday morning talking about the Dodgers comeback extra inning win against the D-backs when Mookie Betts had the walk-off hit. But we did get a question from a listener about that game and something I had tweeted a little bit about, so I wanted to do that. He asked, it's a listener named Court Stell sent us an email, and he says, in last night's game, he sent this on Friday, in last night's game against Arizona that Julio pitched, why did he get credited with an earned run when Stone Garrett drove in Sergio Alcantara with a sac fly in the top of the 3rd inning? Alcantara should have been out at second base except for a Gavin Lux throwing error on the Dalton Varsho at bat. Could you please shed some light on this for me? And this is my favorite kind of question. I love nerdy stuff like this, and so that's why I'm here. In case you don't remember the specifics of that inning, Sergio Alcantara singled to lead off the inning, and then Dalton Varsho hit a ground ball to second base. Gavin Lux had to go to his left to field it. He fielded it and spun. He should have just gone to first base, taken the out at first base, but he spun, tried to get the lead runner at second base, and instead he threw the ball into left field. So Alcantara ended up at third, Varsho ended up at second. after a Ketel Marte, a ground out that didn't score anybody, a soft ground out to second base, didn't score anybody. Ketel Marte walked to load the bases, and then Stone Garrett hit a sac fly. The only run that Julio allowed that game, and it was marked as earned. And court is wondering why, and I'll explain the thing. I go back and forth on whether I agree with this thinking from the scorekeeper, but this is what the ruling was. Excuse me. So the official scorekeeper ruled that Alcantara was not safe at second because of the error. He was safe at second because Lux should have just gone to first base. So Varsho reaches on a fielder's choice that did not produce any outs. Basically, that's the ruling. Before you count the error, it's first and second, nobody out, with Varsho reaching on a fielder's choice that nobody got out on. That's a perfectly legitimate scoring decision. And then on top of that, the throwing error moved Alcantara to third and Varsho to second. So according to the scorer, that's the only effect of the error, is the two guys taking an extra base. Nobody reached base on the error. So then after that, you've got the soft ground out to second base. Without the error, it would have been first and second. So that soft ground out would have moved Alcantara to third base. Whether Lux got the out at second or at first on that ground out doesn't really matter for purposes of the run being earned or not. That ground ball would have moved Alcantara to third base with one out. After Marte's walk, Stone Garrett's sac fly would have still scored Alcantara. So that's the scoring decision. Because the scorer ruled that Alcantara was going to reach second base on that play no matter what. And it's kind of given the benefit of the doubt to the runner. You see it sometimes if a guy hits a slow chopper to third, the third baseman charges in, makes a nice play, and the throw would have gotten the out if it had been on line, but it pulls the first baseman off the bag, and they give the guy a hit, even though with a good throw, he would have been out. But they basically the thinking is, well, the reason he made a bad throw is because he had to go so hard after it. So the hit where the ball was hit deserves a base hit. And this is kind of the same thinking. Basically, if Lux had spun and thrown Alcantara out at second base, it would have been an outstanding play. And I think the scorer's reasoning is, okay, if it would have been an outstanding play if he had gotten it done, then I can't give him an error for not getting it done. So he doesn't get an error for Alcantara getting to second base. It's just the throwing error that advances the base runner. So that's why that run is earned. So Julio's ERA is 225. If that run had been called unearned, his ERA would be 220. Not a huge difference, but notable. Anyway, hope that answered your question, Court. I love that kind of question. If any of you ever have questions like that, feel free to reach out and we'll either talk about them on the show or I'll at least respond to your email or your message or whatever. So I think that's going to do it for me for tonight. Hopefully the audio is recording this time. If you're hearing this, then it did record, and congratulations to me so I can go to bed. But I want to thank you all for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every weekday morning. And now for your second listen, check out the Locked On MLB podcast. MLB expert Paul Francis Sullivan brings humor, passion, and unique perspective on every team and the biggest stories around the league. Follow the #1 daily league-wide podcast, Locked On MLB, on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get podcasts. If you're not watching or listening to Locked On Dodgers every weekday morning, we would love if you'd add 1 or 2 days a month to your rotation. If you have friends or family who love the Dodgers as much as you do, please tell them about the show. If you are watching on YouTube, we'd love to hear your comments down below. If you're listening, shoot us some tweets. We'd love to hear your thoughts on anything we talked about here. If you haven't rated and reviewed us on iTunes or Apple Podcasts, whatever they call it these days, do that. Your comments on YouTube really do help us. It helps, your likes, comments, all that. Obviously, if you haven't subscribed on YouTube, please do that. All that good stuff. You can follow us on Instagram and on Twitter at Locked On Dodgers. Vince is on Twitter at Vince Samperio. I'm on Twitter at Snidog, and the DMs are open in all of those places. Our email address is lockedondodgers@gmail.com, and our phone number for voicemails or texts is 323-863-LOCK, 5625. We are here every weekday morning, and we hope you'll be here with us. When you get in your car or sit on your couch, tell your smart device to play podcast Locked On Dodgers. And remember, you don't have to agree. You just have to listen. We'll talk to you tomorrow.